right, this is part two of my interview with Yvette Cantu-Schneider. Things start to heat up in this one, and I'm so excited to share this with you guys. Enjoy. What would you say to people who are listening to this who still genuinely believe, even if they're just straight up, they're straight, they're not actually going through this themselves, they're not struggling, but they believe people's sexual orientation can change and they should leave a life of being a homosexual in whatever way that looks and be straight? What would you say to them in terms of what they must not be connecting to or missing that you have witnessed and experienced in your walk?
Well, it would be like saying, telling a straight person that they have to be gay. No matter what, you have to be gay. You cannot be with someone of the opposite sex. It would be the exact same experience where no, but I am attracted to the opposite sex. Why do I have to be with someone of the same sex? It's the same thing. It's just not a switch that you can turn on or off. This is what I always say. It's like, if this is what God wanted, then some people would have changed. And believe me, the people I knew, if anyone was going to change, it would be them, because they wanted it so badly and prayed so fervently and served God in every imaginable way. Like, they did everything right, what you would say as a Christian, and still there was no change. Like, just seeing that alone, plus all the people that I came across, I'd go to weddings, went to my one friend's wedding, and he was just so excited that he was marrying a woman and came
Okay.
back from his honeymoon. He said, I have never felt so straight in my life. And they had kids and everything was happy for a while. And then I lost track of him. And then he contacted me after he saw Pray Away. He's like, yep, I had to leave my wife. I'm not straight. And that's what I see happening over and over and over again. I mean, there's some people who they do stay in their mixed orientation marriages because it just, they feel an obligation, or their lives are so intertwined. It would be a hassle, too much of a hassle for them to split apart.
So I've got people in my world, specifically because of my Bethel background, who, when I came out, they're like, what are you saying about all these people at Bethel within the changed ministry that's there? They're saying they've had these radical encounters with Jesus and that he made them straight. They're not gay anymore. What, they're healed. This language, which, is just in and of itself so offensive already. But then they're
Yeah.
like, what are you saying? Like, these people, your testimony matters more than them. You know God better than them. You're more right than they are. Like, for someone who's as heavily involved in the reparative, like, ex-gay movement, and, years of your life and your career and your passion directed to that work and space, and seeing the absence of results of what you guys were working toward, what would you say to people who are seeing the changed thing at Bethel as evidence that you're wrong, your experience is wrong, your expertise on this is not valid because these people are proving something else? I guess their question is, how do you reconcile your worldview and experience of this with these people blatantly saying that they're experiencing what you're saying isn't possible?
But we said the same thing. Like, we did the same thing. We said the same things, like, yes, we're changed. Yes, from the leadership all the way through. And it's just like, you feel changed at some point in time when you're dealing with the thrill of having met someone, like I said, or if now your family is happy with you because you're going to an ex-gay ministry and you're saying that you're changed. But these are momentary, they're brief, they don't last. And of course, you can't say that someone's lying. And I don't believe that they are. I think there really is that emotional high that you have of everything coming together, your sexuality, your community, your spirituality, but inevitably it crumbles. And that's the sad part. It's that people come in with such high hopes and high expectations, and then it crumbles. And
Yeah.
this is where the real damage is, I think, is where people think other people have changed. And so therefore, if I'm not changing, then there's something wrong with me. And so that's the danger of those who are propped up as leaders, and those of us who felt that we had to continue on the course that we set for ourselves, because what are we going to do otherwise? How do you get out of this? So we have to keep saying the party line. Even when people aren't changing.
I was actually genuinely surprised at what you said. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting. I kind of can assume what I would think your opinion was, but your response just kind of pushed me back a bit. For the sake of clarity in this bigger conversation that we're all having, I want to say to the audience, you, Yvette, you have credibility in this space because it's not just an opinion you have. It's not just a judgment you've made. This is like you paid for your understanding and perspective here with years of your life and your story and your career and your personal journey to understand it and work in this space and have to like reconcile with the truth. You're saying the people who are claiming to have these experiences with Jesus and he changed them, you're like, I get it. We did it. We said that. That's like history is already start and finished that whole experience. And in all the different diverse denominations and experiences of different people who claim this experience, 99.99% of the people, I don't know why it's not 100%.
Well, because Mike, can I just say something right here? Because Alan Chambers was the one who said, I think it was at the GCN conference, that 99.99% of people don't change. And the person that was the 0.01% who he was referring to was me. So it's 100%, Mike. I'm the 0.01% Al was referring to.
Yvette.
Did you not know that?
Well, listen, Ed mentioned that in his interview with me, and I was like, oh, really? But I didn't get to like vet that or search it out. I didn't know like if that was like a rumor or hearsay or where that came from. And of course, if Ed's saying it, it's probably accurate. Oh my gosh, it was you that Alan was thinking of when he said that.
Alan was thinking of, yeah.
So it would have been 100% if he didn't know you.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
But think about it. Let me say one more thing.
Please.
And that is, before I forget, because I've thought of this a couple times and then it just keeps leaving my head. But you have books from the conservative Christian side that will say, okay, well, we talked to 250 women and this is how they say they've changed. Or years ago, we boycotted an American Psychiatric Association conference to say, yes, we're ex-gay and we can change and you need to recognize us. And we had signs and we held a press conference. And so Robert Spitzer, who was the one behind having homosexuality removed from the diagnostic and statistical manual that psychiatrists and psychologists use to diagnose people, he said, okay, well, then I'll talk to some of you and we'll figure this out. Well, of course, who's he talking to? Like the names that he was given were people like me and John Paul and Randy Thomas and Alan Chambers. Like all the leaders are coming forward and we're going to tell you that we've changed. And it's the same with these books. Like you're going to the people who have skin in the game. Like we're devoted to, we're telling you, study us, and then we're telling you what we want you to hear.
We're talking about your experience. So I want to just kind of share my thought on the position and like some of the nuance and strain of where the truth falls here. It starts to become a little bit negotiable for some people in this conversation because of what's at stake or what's on the line. For people who choose to come out publicly saying, I used to be gay, like I was a lesbian and now I'm not, or I, whatever, my lifestyle, here are the stats and the details to show you how depraved I was. And then Jesus, so now look at how conformed and like appropriate I've become now. I meet your expectations because that's evidence that God has worked in my life, right? That narrative.
Yes.
For someone like you, someone in your position, where literally there are people right now who are you, however many years ago that was, right? They're in that position. Yeah. For them to come out and say, you know what? My attractions have not changed, but they're married with kids. Some of them have careers, have ministries, have images and platforms built on this very claim that they've been transformed. And so maybe they believed it when they got platformed, right? And maybe they believed it for a while, the first little honeymoon period of however long their willpower and ability to sustain the lie lasted, right? Because of the reinforced external pressure and like affirmation of, oh yes, my parents' approval, my church's approval, the opportunity to lead, be in the front, like all these perks that come from conforming, lying maybe, right? Or accepting this narrative. It was all working for a little bit. And then after a while, you as a human being, you're kind of like, this isn't sustainable. Like I'm tired. I'm not doing well. And then if like a crisis starts to happen or something intensely negative, like their child becoming sick, and then the anxiety just presenting itself, like you had this breakthrough, right? Of just having to be honest with yourself. not everyone has that opportunity where they don't have these things that force them to have to be honest and that they're hitting a brick wall, right? Or a dead end in their journey. Some of them actually double down and go harder into this like message and writing a book and becoming more known in that space. For them to be honest about what's actually going on internally with their attractions and their orientation, they have so much that they would lose, have to give up. Like their life would just, you know, on some level be devastated based on everything they've invested in order to say what you're saying now. Right. And so their presence in the world continues to provide a narrative or an opposition to everything you're saying. But there are people like you who are like, listen, I did that already. I went through that. And there are a bunch of us who went through it. And it's awkward because we've got documentaries with people publicly claiming, and these weren't just like side people who just kind of dabbled. You guys, this was your career. You were public, you were televised, you were like leading organizations, right? And you're like,
for decades.
Yeah. I mean, in history, you've like participated in this whole phenomenon and you're like, it didn't work. And unanimously across the board, you're all like, we didn't change. It didn't change, right? No one was changing. You're all saying this. The people who are representing opposition to this, you're saying, listen, I don't want to judge them. I'm not trying to put them in a box or like whatever, but where that falls in my understanding is they're doing what we did. Like I get it. Like we did that for decades. It just wasn't true.
Exactly. You said that perfectly. Yes. 100%.
So for the people who are asking me that question, who still are convinced and they're still clinging to that gay people can change because look at this, I'm just going to send them this interview. Like you can think that all you want, just realize that there are living people today who've done this already. And the fruit of this is actually really bad.
Really bad. And then you're stuck. And then how do you get out? Because like you said, not everyone has an experience like mine that is so dramatic, where I had no choice, but I have to pull myself together somehow. People may not have had a situation as dramatic as mine. They may never leave, where they're just going to stay where they are and say, this is the safest place for me, but they're not living authentically. They're not living a full life. They've got this secret that's just festering in them, and there's no one to tell, and there's no way to get out. There's no escape. And I know back in my day, we didn't even know that affirming churches existed, that there was an affirming theology. So what are you going to do? You're going to leave God? Because that's what I thought. I thought that was it. Like, I'm just going to have to walk away from church. We'd had some bad church experiences anyway, like a lot of people have. So it's just easier for me to turn my back on God and say that I'm gay. What else am I going to do? Because I don't even have a choice.
So I've just kind of paid attention in my journey, like specifically in my relationship with God, as the Holy Spirit has influenced my process. I've noticed some patterns, and because I've had some pretty radical experiences with God at certain points in my life. And almost all of them, right before I had a dramatic exchange with God on a deep spiritual level, it was almost always preceded by some kind of event in my life that shook my grip on the foundation of what I understood about my life or me or the world I lived in or something, right? It was like there was a foundational tectonic plate shift or threat or poke or something, not even an event. It was more just like a threat or, I don't know, a breach of my solid understanding what was true. Like all of a sudden there was a question. And with that genuine like poke, all of a sudden, shortly after that moment, I'm having this dramatic experience with God and he's speaking to me. And I'm like, I don't know that God was doing that. I don't know if he was capitalizing on that. To me, the pattern was because the question was so genuine and I didn't have an answer for it, whatever defense I had in place that kept those things at bay, when that defense was gone, I heard the voice of the Lord. Like the sensitive, authentic me heard him. And every time he spoke in that space, it was always affirming who I was and reaching for this person and wanting me to be this way. And I was like, that can't be it. That can't be it. That can't be it. For 14 years, I did that. And then when I hear your story, I'm like, I think this might reinforce that pattern that I'm observing. You're going on this journey and then something shakes the foundation of what you know to be, what you assume they got to just accept, like, this is how life is. And all of a sudden it's not like that anymore. Something genuinely like outside of your control is threatening what you knew. And now you're like, what do I do with this? And then all of a sudden that's where the break got to take place. And you realize there's something else here that matters more and I have to honor this. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, and yeah, and if something that dramatic had to happen, at least for me, because there's no way that I would have
Yeah.
admitted to not having changed otherwise. Like I would not have changed the course of my life on my own because it was just too, I was just in that rut and then there was still that I want to please God. I can't see that I would please God otherwise until I got to the point where it's like, well, now I have to be mad at God and I have to walk away, which
Mm,
is really sad because no one should have to do that ever.
right. That should not be the message that people are getting from.
Right, right. The message should not be like, oh, this is just, why did I fall for this? Why did I fall for the Christian message? Because that's what ends up happening. Like, oh, this is just so wrong. I should never have fallen for it in the first place. Like, honestly, that's where I went. I was just so wrong about so many things. And how can I ever trust myself again? And that sort of thing. How can I ever trust God again? But, fortunately, that all came back because God's not just going to let me go. And it wasn't until I met Cathy that I even knew that you could be gay and a Christian. After I had been gone from Exodus for a couple of years and I felt like I was in a more stable place.
I just want to say right now, real quick, just because it's the emotion is welling up. I feel like I'm just sitting on the floor in front of your like rocking chair. I'm just like, tell me your story. You know what I mean? I just feel so excited. And I also just feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the courage that you're living your life with and your willingness to walk this out and be as vocal and honest about your process as you are, because I understand like to refute decades of your life and your career is probably humiliating, or was at some point, right? It's
Yeah, for
expensive.
sure.
There's such a sacrifice there. There's such a loss, right? Of renouncing so many things that you invested so much energy and professionalism and skill and effort and clout into. Like that's a price. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge like that was such a sacrifice on your part. And I just want to commend you for the courage and willingness for you to be authentically yourself and be honest about your experience, even at the cost of what it's brought to you. Like I'm honored to be in front of you listening to you right now and that you're in the world saying this. I'm just so thankful that you're bringing that to the table, because there's so much harm being done to people who refuse to do that, who will not renounce what they wrongfully engaged in, even though it's harming people, right? The verse, you prevent people from entering the kingdom while you yourselves refuse to enter, is coming up. That was a rebuke that I experienced in my journey of coming out. Yeah. And it was like, you change your mind. You're like, I'm going to not prevent people from getting in anymore, and I'm going to go in myself, which required humility and childlikeness. And I respect that. Thank you. Sorry, carry on.
Thank you for saying that. It's,
Yeah.
I feel like, it's like 2 decades of the prime of my life
Yeah.
that I can't get back.
Right.
Like there's nothing that I can do to change that. All I can do is move forward and try to make better choices and try to do things that are more authentic and not just listen to outside voices all the time.
Because of your journey, there are people who are going to listen to this conversation, and it's going to break the delusion that there are people in the world who are changing because of Jesus. It's going to break the idea that God is changing people from this, when you and I both know that he's not doing that. And he's not just not changing people, he loves us the way we are.
As we are.
And so your sacrifice and like what you walked out and lived for so long gets to bear weight that breaks stuff in people's minds who are willing to listen. So I don't know that it's nothing, you know what I mean? I don't think it's just loss. Yes, there's loss, absolutely. But also there's such redemption. And so I'm so thankful that you're willing to like share from that place. Like it's such a gift. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, because it is hard. It's like, sometimes I just want to, and sometimes I do just cry and what happened? Like what? Why did I make the decisions that I did? Why did I stick so long in something that it just was not nourishing my spirit or anyone else's? And I knew that. And I just cared more about, I guess, what other people thought, or I don't know what I would do with my life. All those kinds of questions were just more important. And that I regret. And then, so after a couple of years, I decided because people knew me, because I was out there, people had listened to my voice, that it was incumbent upon me to come out publicly. I had this friend, Jeremy, and he would write every once in a while for GLAAD.
Would you care to just help them know what GLAAD is?
Yeah, so GLAAD is the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. So mostly what they do is deal with movies, television, the depiction of LGBTQ people in media. And Jeremy said, well, I want to do an interview with you. And then, GLAAD will push it out, publicize it. So I wrote a letter. So it was an open letter that I wrote, basically saying my experiences, and that no, I had never seen anyone change. And I was sorry for my past involvements, and just backing away from all of that. And so on day one, they published that. And then on day two, Jeremy had done an interview with me. And then GLAAD published that interview. And they handled all the media for that. They were very good about it. GLAAD was excellent. They were very gracious, and they handled all of the media inquiries, all of that. Well, Ross Murray, who was the head of communications there at the time, was talking to me on the phone because he's the one who handled all of this. And he said, you live in Reno. Do you happen to know Cathy Balduck? And I said, no. I've never even heard of her. And he said, oh, she's got this really popular website. This is before her first book hadn't come out yet. It was about to, none of the things that we all know Cathy for, her book reviews, all that, none of that had happened yet. And I said, no, I don't know. And he said, oh, well, you have to connect with her. So I had that in my mind. I wrote down her name. Well, at the same time, a friend of hers had said, you know what? I was looking on Yvette's Facebook, and every time she posts, it comes from the same location as where you post. So I don't know if she's there on vacation or what's going on. That was back in the day when Facebook would just put the city you were in. Right. That's how long ago that was. Ross said, yeah, she was kicked out of a church there recently, and it's on YouTube. So I go and I look it up on YouTube, and it's Cathy and these two guys on either side of her, trying to pull her out of the church. And she's like, don't touch me, get your hands off me. And it's like, oh my gosh, she's so scary.
I've seen that video. She looks wild.
Yeah. So that was the video, right? That was my first contact, my first exposure to Cathy Balduck. So I'm like, uh-oh, kind of scared of this woman. She sent me a message on Facebook and said, are you in town? Are you by me? I always hike on this particular trail. And I responded, I said, I hike on that trail too. Yeah. And so she said, well, do you want to meet me to hike? And I have to say, I was intimidated because I did not know how she would be with me. Was she just going to rake me over the coals and tell me what an awful person I was? Do I really want to be meeting someone for a hike and just hear all these horrible things? Like, this
you really
is
want
what
to be alone in the wilderness with this woman?
Yeah, exactly. Or she has me all alone and she can tell me what an awful person I am. So we met for a hike. And of course, Cathy's Cathy. She was very friendly and wanted just to ask me a bunch of questions and know all about me. And then we found so many avenues of oh my gosh, I know that person too. Oh yes, I know. I did this, I've spoken here. We just had so much to connect over. And then it wasn't even long after that, probably a few months after that her book came out. So I actually read her book in advance and offered some feedback on some portions. And we have been friends ever since. In the beginning, I told Cathy, and probably at least for a couple of years, I don't want to talk about God. Don't try to tell me to go to church. I don't want to hear any of that. And she said, I'll never do that to you. But it was just a matter of seeing, for me, so many gay Christians who really love God.
What was your exposure to these gay Christians? Where were you?
Well, this was it. It was just through Cathy, people that I would meet through Cathy, and then social media becoming more prominent, meeting people that way, talking to people, conferences. People, as you know, come through town and see Cathy's. I've met all sorts of people who have just come through town to see Cathy. And these are people who are genuine Christians who want to serve God the way I had wanted to serve God. This is not just someone who's saying, I want to go to church on Easter and Christmas. Like, these are real Christians. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, you can be gay and Christian. And I think after that, then it was, for me, that's the way it was. Like, I didn't need to see any kind of theology, any of that first. That came second. I needed to see the people. I needed to see the fruits first, and then see the scholarly part of it. What I'm doing now is I'm actually writing my experiences from the Christian right, because I've never done that completely. I've never written it all out. So I'm doing that, but along with it, a lot of the questions that I get asked that I didn't anticipate, try to anticipate what people are going to ask you. And the number one question I get from people is basically, how do you live with yourself? And it's not an insulting question, as in, how do you live with yourself? It's coming from parents, because they may have sent their kids to ex-gay ministries or conversion therapy. It's coming from pastors who have sent people to ex-gay ministries and conversion therapy. It's coming from LGBTQ people themselves who are upset with themselves for having denied their sexuality and an integral part of themselves. Like, how do you almost get past the self-loathing and the hating yourself? And so that's what I'm writing about as well. Like, that's part of this, because any of us can look at things in our past and say, I wish I hadn't done that, or why did I make that decision? But I don't think any of it honors God or honors who you are in your spirit by just beating yourself up for the rest of your life. Like, that doesn't bring honor to anyone. And there are so many things you can do when you shed that and just say, no, I'm from this point out, I'm going to live differently and I'm going to make a difference.
What do you imagine you're going to be doing in high schools? What are you going to say to these kids?
Well, we're going to try to go to high school groups for gender identity and sexual orientation, and just telling them about the history. It's not like people knew what same-sex couples were at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. Like, this is not, you weren't going to say that they were gay or homosexual back then. You weren't going to recognize them as, partnerships the way that you would a man and a woman. I think when students, especially when you're talking about high school and college, when they really understand how things fit in history, it'll make more sense to them why Christians believed what they did, why these things happened at a certain time in history. I think that's really important. This is what I've learned from Cathy, to really root ourselves in where we fall in history. I just happened to fall at a really bad time in history and the whole ex-gay movement was really ramping up, and that's what the church had glommed onto.
Right. And I think a little bit too, as I look at your life and then also just in the part of history that you happened in and all those things were going on, I feel like that could have happened to a lot of different people, going on your journey. And that period of time is evidence to us collectively as a whole of looking at what we did and the results of our beliefs and our attitudes and our priorities and our agenda and how we twisted things to make them up to something that we wanted them to be. And then the harm that came from doing that. And there's so many lessons to be learned from that, right? But you walked it out. And as a part of this collective conversation we're all having, you played your part at helping expose the errors that we made and the ways that we were prejudiced and how we approached this whole thing and the ways that we were wrong.
And it was just this particular political time as well. That was such a big piece of it. The right was thinking, how do we get the Christians into the voting booths? How do we engage them? And then picking lightning rod topics to get them to be conservatives. Right. To get them to vote a certain way. And it's really sad when you look at it that way, that there were so many politics behind it, so many politics behind the idea that gay people can change.
Oh, yeah.
I know. If you stop and think about it too much, it can really,
seriously,
really bring you down.
Okay, so I'm gonna snap right out of that. What are some bullet points that you've taken away from your journey that you're like, hey, if my life had any lessons for people, or if I had any advice for people based on what I've witnessed and experienced personally, here's some things that I would say I've absolutely discovered or learned along the way that I think we should all be aware of.
Above all, be true to yourself. Listen to your gut. I'm not saying just only listen to your gut, but I'm saying believe yourself. Believe yourself. If there's a red flag, there's a red flag for a reason. And it can't be explained away by some Bible scriptures being taken out of context. I would say don't always just listen to whoever is in your inner circle right now, or whoever that you, especially if you're going to your pastor or parents or whatever, you've got to do your own research, and that you can do now. Read the books, see what's out there. Don't just say this can't be true and push it aside. That would be the number one lesson I would tell anyone. This is what I tell my kids. Like, you have to trust, those instincts are there for a reason. They're God-given for a reason. That's how you feel any sort of stirring of the Holy Spirit. That's where you're going to feel it. You have to believe that.
Mm.
And then you can do research from there, but don't dismiss it. Don't ever dismiss that feeling, that instinct. That's the still small voice. That's the voice. That's the voice. And then pursue it, and then go out. And then there are so many resources now online, especially that we didn't have, that you can look at. And so I would say that absolutely number one.
Okay. Is there a number two?
Well, the number two for me is just having a solid core group of friends that you can be real with, and not just people that you agree with, but people who will respect you and respect whatever your experience is, whatever your journey is, who will be willing to journey with you, even if theirs is different, and not judge you for it. Like, I found that to be so great. I was allowed to be with my friends who I really am, and they aren't all on the same page with me, and they aren't all like me at all, and they don't have to be. I'm not like them, but I support them and they support me. I think that is key too, is just find people who respect you enough to support you even when they disagree.
Is there a number three?
I don't know that this is generally and for everyone, but I have found that contemplative meditative prayer has really helped me to stay grounded, where it's not just petitioning God, or it's not, it's the quiet, just sitting in the presence of God. That to me has been life-changing for me, where there isn't any sort of there's not really a goal. It's just to be.
Lectio Divina.
Yeah, it's nice. Awesome. I'll do that sometimes sitting, sometimes walking. Sometimes I'll go to the monastery where the nuns are.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And
That's
it's just
awesome.
quiet. It's just quiet. We don't, so there aren't going to be any theological differences. There's not going to be any kind of discussion about that. It's just people gathering to sit and contemplate. So I know that's not for everyone, but I absolutely think it's sort of like the Christian version of Buddhist meditation.
My podcast is called Confessions of a Reformer. And so usually when I interview somebody, I ask them if they have a confession they'd like to make as it pertains to their field, their work, their journey.
I guess a confession for me would be, what is God actually like? Like, we have him as God the Father, and then you have this very masculine view of God, but then you bring in, but God also encompasses the feminine, and Adam and Eve were made in his image. So what exactly is that image? We seem to only think of things in the binary male, female, but what is God really? All of that? None of that? Something different? That's my confession. That's what I don't know. You tell me, Mike. You tell me.
No, I agree. And I also I was going to ask, do you have like a hypothesis or a leaning there? But I actually don't know what I don't know what I would say. But that is a question I have too. And I've literally had to wrestle with, is it okay for me, even as I write posts on Instagram or something, like, can I just keep calling God he? and referring to him as him, like, is that appropriate? Or am I actually like misrepresenting what I understand about this person at this point if I continue to gender him as a male?
Right. Right.
So I actually made a post the other day and I used they for him, like a non-binary
Yeah.
pronoun for God. And I wasn't trying to like start a fight. I'm just more like, I feel like this feels more authentic to who I understand God to be. I don't think he's male. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's more to him than this. So yeah, I have the same question and same like openness. Like he's allowed to be something different than we all have like locked into.
Yeah. And I have no idea what it is.
Well, Yvette, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, I'm so honored that you have taken the stand that you have. I love that you have chosen to be public and to respond. It takes a big person to do that, to like regard your career and the choices you've made in this way and show up like that. I feel very honored, witnessing your life, that you would show up and like communicate and be that vulnerable and honest with us. Like you don't have to do it. So I appreciate the stand, and thank you for coming on this interview with me and sharing so vulnerably and honestly. And there are a couple moments where I was genuinely surprised. I can't wait to go back while I'm editing this and like relive those moments. I was like, whoa. And just some of the answers you just like were immediate. I was like, well, nice. Like you're just there. So cool.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. And anyone can contact me through canyonwalkerconnections.com on the website, or I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And so if anyone has questions or comments, feel free.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So you guys, and if you can't find her on Facebook, Yvette and I are friends on Facebook, so you can just go to my friend list and find her. Well, Yvette, again, thank you so much. It's been an honor chatting with you, and I can't wait for people to get to hear this episode.
Thank you.
Love it. This is a response and a voice in the midst of this really big, important conversation we're still having. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, for sure. Okay, and that concludes my interview with Yvette Cantu-Schneider. Wasn't that amazing? Fascinating. So important for this conversation. Thank you, Yvette. Listen, if you're a queer Christian and you are looking for a safe place to process and reconcile your faith and your sexuality, then the Rainbow Room was built with you in mind. I've provided a link below this episode for you to check it out. I hope you join us. We'll see you next time.